Hello, and welcome to Worcester College, albeit the electronic dystopian hellscape version. My name is Leah. I teach constitutional and administrative law for the college, and I'm really excited today to tell you about studying law at a place like Worcester, but a lot of what I say applies across Oxford and indeed to undergraduate law in general. So I'm going to say something today about the substance of studying law. I'm going to say what the study of my subject involves, what I teach, how we teach it at Worcester. I'm going to talk about the contact hours, the process of applying, and so on. But before I say anything about that, the most important thing I'm going to say today is that studying law at undergraduate level at a place like Oxford is not the same as qualifying to practice law in England and Wales. That's the most important message I try to get across in open days. If you remember nothing else I say today, please remember that. I'll say more about this at the end, and in my comments today, I'm going to try to explain the difference between studying law at undergraduate level and what you do when you train to be a barrister or a solicitor. If you have any questions about anything I say, I know it's extremely complicated, feel free to email any of the Worcester Law Fellows. Our emails are on the website. Mine is leah.trueblood@law.ox.ac.uk. So we'd love to hear from you. Please don't hesitate to get in touch. But again, that's the most important thing to remember. Students often find this confusing. It's not the qualification that an undergraduate law degree is not the same as a qualification to practice. And indeed, if you're interested in practicing as a barrister or solicitor, an undergraduate law degree is not necessarily the best path to get there. It's important to think hard about whether that's for you, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So first I'm going to say something about what the study of our subject involves, and it involves, you won't be surprised to hear, it involves the study of law. So we study principally two types of laws. We study cases, that is decisions made by judges, and we study statutes, that is decisions made by Parliament, and we're interested in particular in the relationship between those two types of law. So usually for a reading list, what you get a textbook chapter, and it would lay out, okay, here are the big legal issues around theft, around the rule of law, around murder, for example. And then you'll read the statutes, you'll read what Parliament has to say on the subject, and then what we spend a lot of time doing is looking at the cases. So looking at what judges say about this law, how they interpret it, the difficult questions that are thrown up by various fact patterns. And we think hard about the satisfactoriness of the law. We try to understand the law, and we try to assess how defensible we think it is, or whether we think it should be reformed. And that's really what I think makes us different from other subjects that you do at undergraduate level. So once you've read all of your cases and your statutes in your textbook, then we read articles, we read books about questions like, should it ever be criminally punishable to fail to do something instead of doing it? Should omissions ever be criminally punishable, for example? Or here's a different conception of the rule of law. So we think about really big ideas, and then we use those to assess the satisfactoriness of the law. And so most undergraduate courses in arts and science involve this study of big ideas, right? Philosophy, politics, economics, classics. But what makes us, I think, distinctive as a subject, and what it's really important that you enjoy to succeed as a law student, and more importantly to have fun, is to really enjoy reading cases and statutes, to really enjoy the study of the law, of this body of rules. And then what we do at undergraduate level, as I say, is we think about the relationship between these rules and big ideas, right? Is a contract a promise? Right? And if a contract is a promise, how does that shape what the law says a contract is, for example? But when you study to be a barrister solicitor, which is another course that you have to take once you've done some degree, it could be a law degree, it could be another degree, you look just or almost exclusively at the rules, right? You don't think about the big ideas shaping the law. So what we're really trying to do is to teach you to think critically about the law. It's like any other kind of liberal degree, it's trying to teach you to argue, to think. It's trying to teach you a set of study and professional skills. So what I would really say is what we want you to think about if you're wondering if a law degree is for you, is to ask yourself whether you're really interested in those specific rules and the theoretical implications of those rules. That's what's really important, because there are lots of the big ideas we talk about, what the rule of law requires, what democracy requires. Those are also covered in philosophy and politics. And a law degree is for you if you're interested in the substantive study of the rules that govern how those principles are articulated in law in the United Kingdom in particular. So I specialize in teaching constitutional administrative law. So students take constitutional law in their first year, administrative law in their second year. And constitutional law involves topics like human rights, the rule of law, separation of powers, and devolution. And again, we draw this connection between rules and ideas. So we study the topics theoretically. What does the rule of law require? And then we read a bunch of cases to think about, are there ever trade-offs that the law defensibly makes? For example, keeping parts of cases or entire cases private from the secret from the public, or even from parties in particular cases. And in administrative law, we think about how we hold the executive accountable. So the executive includes government ministers, but it also includes those organs that execute the law. So it involves Oxford County Council, the Home Office, the NHS, and we think about how to hold the executive accountable, particularly through decisions by judges in a process called judicial review. So a connection between big ideas and rules we think a lot about in administrative law, for example, is, under what circumstances, if any, is it appropriate for judges to defer to the executive on questions of national security? So that's a classic example of what we're interested in administrative law. And sometimes you might think it is, sometimes you might think it isn't. But thinking about the factual scenarios in which that might be defensible and why is a big part of what we do in administrative law. So as you'll see in the topics I teach, although not all topics, there's a huge amount of politics going on, but it's not just politics. We study, you must know the law, you must understand the rules, and that's really what makes the subject of law distinctive. So how is our subject taught at Worcester? Well, we teach mainly in groups of 2 or 3. So usually what would happen is you'll get a reading list at the beginning of term. You'd write an essay every week for a subject, and then you'd come to my office for an hour and a half, and we'd chat about the essay, we'd chat about other issues on the reading list. I usually start tutorial by asking students to tell me things they found interesting, persuasive, unpersuasive. So every term you do 1.5 subjects. So for example, in the first year of a law degree, everybody does constitutional law. So at Worcester we do constitutional law the first term, Roman law the second term, and then you split criminal law across the first 2 terms. So everybody does 1.5 subjects a term. So you'd have 1 week with 1 tutorial, and then every second week you'd have 2 tutorials. And there are lectures as well that are put on by the faculty centrally. It depends how you learn. A big part of university is learning how you learn and what's helpful for you. So some students find those helpful and go to lots of them. Some of them don't. Some go for some subjects and not others. That is really, at least in Worcester, our policy is that's really up to you. But the center of undergraduate teaching and life is very much in the college. So yeah, you'd usually expect, in terms of contact hours with us, 1.5 to 3 hours a week, but you can always drop by our offices if you have questions or concerns or anything like that. So what do we look for in a competitive application? So above all, we're looking for enthusiasm for the law. As I say, we're interested in people who really want to understand the theoretical implications of this body of rules. And we're looking for people who are curious and highly motivated in general. So the law is absolutely fascinating, I think, and very fun, but a lot of it is very boring. It's very hard work. And what we really want is we want people who are motivated enough to stick with it when it gets boring, when they get tired, when they don't understand something. And the best way to do that is to be really curious and genuinely interested about the law. So that's what we're trying to see, and to see people who are going to flourish in, as I say, thinking about cases, thinking about statutes. There are lots of very smart people that we interview who clearly, would do well in a course like philosophy, politics, economics, where you're just talking about the big ideas. But we also want people who are interested in the very specific implications of those big ideas in the study of rules. It's a very competitive degree. lots of people want to do it, so every part of the application matters. I would start as soon as you can. Do as many, drafts, think about it as you can, as much as you can, do as much research as you can. The one thing I'll say is that I think students sometimes underestimate how seriously we take the LNET essay, and we take it extremely seriously because our course is essay and argument driven. It's important to us to see how students think about a question, how they express themselves. That gives us a very, in some ways a limited, but in other ways it's our only window into how students think. So I would encourage you to take it seriously. Thinking about the interview as part of the application process, the interview is of course important, but it's certainly not dispositive. We often admit students whose interview, probably could have gone a bit better. And we also often admit students whose enthusiasm for the law isn't really clear on paper, but really comes through in person in our conversation. It's really clear they want to get stuck into the rules. They're interested in the relationship between rules and ideas. And it really becomes obvious to us that this is the degree for them. Everybody that we interview is incredibly smart, capable, motivated, could get a good result at a great university. We're looking for people who are going to flourish in this particular kind of environment where they write a lot of essays in a very short space of time, that they're going to enjoy coming to my office every week and chatting about the law. It's definitely not for everybody, believe me. So we're looking for people who are going to thrive doing this subject in this kind of way. And if we don't admit people, it certainly doesn't mean they're not smart, capable, going to be highly successful. It absolutely doesn't mean that. We're looking for a fit between person and subject and place. And the interview is one part of that, but it's certainly not the only part of that. And so if you're interviewed, you don't feel like it goes great, don't worry about it. Please don't stress about it. Lots of students felt their interview didn't go well, and they get in, and lots of people feel like the interview was a triumph, and it may well have been, and we can still assess that we just don't think this is the best fit between person and degree and place. Are there any resources or activities I would recommend for students? So the first thing that I think is important, as I say, is to really show that you're interested in this body of rules. And the best way to do that is to follow the legal sections, particularly of the newspaper, particularly those works by Joshua Rosenberg. There's a very good set of resources for constitutional law, administrative law, but not just constitutional and administrative law, on a blog called Public Law for Everyone by Professor Mark Elliott at Cambridge. And that he's got a series of very good lectures on what doing law at undergraduate level entails, what kinds of issues to think about. This is maybe a bit controversial, but I would recommend the UK Supreme Court website, and just go watch the hearings, watch the judgment summaries, have a read through some of the cases, and you'll get a sense of that's the kind of material we're expecting you to read for months or years on end. And if it just makes you want to cry with boredom, and it doesn't sort of light any kind of fire within you, that's really not a great sign. What we really want you to get a sense of when you're applying is what kinds of relationships between rules and ideas interest you. Are those in sort of private law, issues like contract and tort? Are they in public law? And thinking about the methodology, as I say, of a law degree, and whether you find that interesting and fun. There are lots of good books. Nick McBride's Letters to a Law Student is one that people often recommend. Have You Thought About Law by Catherine Bernard. But it's also, I think, important, the Law Society and all kinds of other organizations, if you Google them, have very good videos and accounts of what it means to be a barrister, what it means to be a solicitor, resources for prospective law students. So I would do as much research as you can to make sure that this is the degree for you. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But before that, I want to say I've talked a little bit what makes law boring, but what makes it exciting to study law. So the subject I teach right now, could hardly be more relevant. The constitutional questions that Brexit throws up are just totally fascinating, and it's just so fun and fulfilling to help students learn to write in a tutorial system. Students in the Oxford model get more feedback on their writing than any university I'm aware of in the world. And that's a skill that's going to help you whatever you want to do. And so to me, that's the real benefit, is if you want to get a lot of feedback on your writing, if you want to learn how to write and think and argue in an extremely rigorous way, that's really the benefit of the system that we can offer. But as I say, my most important message today is to say that studying law at undergraduate level is not synonymous as practicing law as a solicitor or a barrister. And so it counts towards a qualifying law degree, but very often people do degrees in philosophy, politics, classics, and then they convert those degrees. So it's a little bit of a longer process if you do a non-law degree, but not very much. And by far, the most important thing to do is to do a subject that interests you, that excites you, that you feel really motivated and curious about studying. We very often get students apply who kind of think they're interested in law, but they're not really sure. They sort of come to it because, well, I'm not really good at these other things. I'm not good enough with blood to be a doctor, and I'm really smart, so I'm going to become a lawyer. And that's really I really don't recommend that. I don't think that's the right way to think about it. If you're interested in literature, history, politics, do that. And it's far better to do a subject that interests you and get a really good result, have fun, learn how to argue, develop your professional skills, and then convert and become a barrister solicitor, rather than sort of struggle through a law degree, have a miserable time, get sort of an okay degree. It's really not the best way to live your life, and it's certainly not the best route to be a barrister solicitor. The best route to anything you want to do is to do something that you really love and really excites you. And so my advice would be to do as much research as you can, talk to as many people as you can, email us, try to figure out if this is the degree for you because of that connection between rules and ideas. And if it is, then that's absolutely wonderful, and we'd be so excited, and I'm sure very fortunate to welcome you to Worcester. So that's everything I want to say today. Please don't hesitate to get in touch. I know this is a difficult, stressful time to be making decisions, and I wish you the very best with it. Bye for now.
Hi, my name's Natalia Waits-Hickman. I'm one of the philosophers at Worcester. And I thought if you don't really know what philosophy is or what it's about, then the best way to start getting a grip on that is just to meet some philosophical questions. So I thought I'd start with one very general question which can crop up in different forms all over the subject. And then I'll give you 3 examples before talking a bit more about me and what I work on. So the very general question is, in what ways does being the kinds of being that we are shape our experience of the world and the kinds of knowledge that we can have about it? Or to put it a bit more unsettlingly perhaps, how much of the content of our experience is something that we bring to it? How much is a reflection of how the world is objectively in itself, independently of us, and how much simply reflects us, our own particular limited, conditioned modes of thinking and feeling? So 3 examples. One, at the species level, you might simply ask about how our physiology conditions our experience of the world. So you might think about how our having a human visual system as opposed to the visual system of a bee or a cat or a horse affects our colour perception, for example. And that would take you into the philosophy of mind and perception and cognitive science. You might also think, however, that our language and the fact that we are language users at all, that we operate with particular conceptual categories, that imposes some sort of structure on our experience, and that there could be alternative structures. So that would take you into parts of philosophy of language and metaphysics. A third example, and you might have met some debates in this sort of area without necessarily realizing you were doing or seeing philosophy, is in ethics. People argue about whether a particular moral, a particular act, if it's morally wrong, objectionable, incorrect, forbidden, if that's just an objective fact, or whether the judgment that it's wrong or bad simply reflects a particular cultural perspective, and that there may be other admissible cultural perspectives from which that judgment wouldn't seem right at all. So that's an example of a range of philosophical questions. The areas that I work on, so I've got very broad interests, but I work mainly in 4 areas. One is epistemology, where we focus mostly on knowledge and inquiry and the nature of these. So what's the value of knowledge? Why does it matter? What is it? What are the sources of knowledge? Are there any principal obstacles to our getting knowledge of some kind? How does it relate to understanding and being justified, and even certain rational capacities? A growing area of interest in that field is called social epistemology, and here we think about how the social group to which you belong or the social position you occupy might affect the kinds of knowledge that you can get and the obstacles that you might face in trying to transmit your knowledge to other people. So an overlapping area that I work in is philosophy of language, and their traditional questions are: what is a language? What's the nature of linguistic meaning? How does language get to be about aspects of the world around us? And how is it woven into communication? So apart from sharing a common language, what do 2 conversation partners need to be sort of attuned to or sensitive to in order to understand each other and understand what the other person's getting at, what they're really trying to convey with their speech? As in epistemology, there's a growing interest in the political and social dimensions of language. So an example there would be the study of propaganda and manipulative speech. A third area that I work in is philosophy of mind. And here some very general questions would be: what is the mind? How does it relate to the brain? On what basis do I ascribe minds to other people, or thoughts or feelings? How can I be sure they have thoughts and feelings like mine? Might it be possible to credit machines or computers' artificial intelligence with aspects of mind in the future? We also look at more specific areas of mental experience, for example, what's involved in seeing a colour or hearing a sound. How do these differ from dreaming or hallucinating a colour or a sound? And what can science tell us about the nature of perception and how it differs from these kinds of states? I also work in philosophy of action, but I won't talk about that because you wouldn't touch it as an undergraduate. It does relate in places to ethics, and that's something you certainly would study. So I hope that gives you a bit of a sense of some of the questions that philosophy looks at. There are many more. In your first year as an undergraduate philosopher, you would do a course in moral philosophy. You'd also cover maybe some of the questions that I've mentioned in something we call general philosophy, and you'd do an introduction to logic. Thereafter, you've got a lot of freedom in deciding how much philosophy you want to do and which papers you want to take. And there's lots of information about that on the philosophy faculty website in the admissions section. The teaching of philosophy at Worcester, as in most colleges, proceeds in 2 main ways: in small classes and in tutorials, and that's complemented at the university level by lectures. Tutorials are definitely the main method of teaching, and that reflects the way that we expect you to work and to learn while you're here. So they're very unlike school lessons. We're not going to deliver pre-packaged information to you. You have to work independently. You'll go off to the library and research original papers and books on your own, critically assess them in your own terms, and normally you'll come back to your tutor with an essay based on that reading. So you'll see your tutor for an hour each week, normally with 1 tutorial partner, maybe 2, or you might be on your own. And a substantial part of the tutorial is normally devoted to discussing your essay or your tutorial partners, but it varies from tutor to tutor and from class to class. So tutorials are really very interactive, very free, very improvised, so you won't really know in advance which aspects of a topic you're going to end up discussing, what you might be asked about, so you'll be put under quite a lot of pressure to think on your feet and put on the spot. Just about every point you make and every argument you advance is going to be challenged, and there won't be another 20 people in the room to fill the silence, so you have to get brave and participate. And sometimes you won't know what to say, and that's fine. It can be a little bit daunting at first, but it very quickly just becomes a huge amount of fun because these are really free and open discussions with your tutor and a partner where you can thrash out your ideas and see where all your arguments lead. So if that sounds like it might be fun, even if a little bit scary, then please consider applying. Since I've been talking about tutorials, I'll move on to interviews, because philosophy interviews in particular are expressly designed to give us a sense of what you might be like in a tutorial setting, whether that's a way of learning that you would thrive with, that you would enjoy and work well with. So at Worcester, the philosophy interviews normally last 20 minutes or so, with 2 tutors. And since they're a little bit like tutorials, you should realise they're absolutely not designed to catch you out. There's no horrible test. It's just an opportunity for a conversation. We try very, very hard not to ask you any questions where background knowledge would make a difference, unless you're really desperate to talk about something that you've read or studied. It's just not going to come up. We already know what everybody's studied. We're not interested in getting more information on that score. We're really only interested in how you think about things. So you'll probably be given an argument or a philosophical puzzle at the beginning, or possibly in advance of the interview, to think about. And we'll want you to tell us, how you think you should respond to the puzzle, or whether you think the argument that we've given you is a convincing one, and if so, why or why not. And there are really no forbidden responses here. It doesn't matter whether we agree with you or not. Even if we agree, we'll probably pretend not to. We're just interested in how you get to the conclusion that you want to defend. And if you change course through the interview, that's fine. You might find in the course of the discussion that the position that you originally thought was most attractive actually isn't working out, and you think that the opposite position is more convincing. That's fine, as is, of course, sticking to your guns. We really just want to see how you play with these ideas and arguments, and you're encouraged to ask questions, and if you want to take a pause to think, that's completely fine. We really want you to be as comfortable as possible so that you can just have a conversation with us. So you shouldn't be scared of interviews. They can be quite fun, but it's also important to realise that they're just one part of the application process. So it's an important bit of information for us, because meeting you can give us a bit of a sense of what you might be like in the classroom. But it's only one bit of information that we're going to consider alongside lots of other things. We'll have your personal statement and the essays that you've written, and what your teachers say about you at school, what you've studied before, and so on. So it's really just one bit of an overall picture of you that we're trying to get in assessing the application. So what am I looking for in an application for philosophy? I guess number one is probably an analytical mind. So a mind that likes to break things down and take them apart and lay things out more clearly. That's a much, much more important skill in philosophy than problem solving. Not that problem solving skills will do you any harm, they're just much less essential than an aptitude for analysis. Second, imagination. So do you have an eye for the slightly less obvious consequences of an argument or position, for slightly less obvious connections between ideas? And third, a kind of attitude, I guess, a joy of new ideas and learning, and a real willingness to test and challenge your own preconceptions and those of other people. We want students who are really going to engage critically with absolutely everything that we throw at them, and who will take full advantage of the opportunities on offer. So about the opportunities, I'm sure lots of people have told you why it's wonderful to study at Worcester. Why come to Oxford to do philosophy? I guess there are two things. One is the tutorial system, which I don't want to go on about, but it's really excellent for learning philosophy because it's a dialectical discipline. So having the opportunity week after week to have that dialogue, that back and forth with your tutor and a tutorial partner where you can thrash out your ideas and strengthen arguments and sharpen your thinking, that's a fantastic opportunity to have, as well as being huge fun, as part of your philosophical education. The second thing is that Oxford has by far the largest faculty of philosophy in the world. It's not the centre of the universe. There are many wonderful places to study, but Oxford does have a very important centre of philosophy. So the quality of lectures tends to be very high, but also the range of lectures and classes and conferences, talks, seminars that are on offer, where you can meet other students and other professionals in different areas of the subject, is just huge. There's really too much going on. For just about any area of Western philosophy, Oxford has as many world-class people working just in that area as would fill, half a department or a whole department in another place. And that just, gives you a real wealth of opportunities for learning for just about any area of the discipline that you might be interested in. There's probably somebody who's given a talk or a lecture on it, if not a whole lecture series this term. So it's that wealth of opportunities for learning about philosophy that I would say is a very good reason for coming here. So hopefully you'll apply.